So this is unrelated to the video, but I just realized, could we get like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the Virgin Galactic guy to work together on making... Oh, hey Phoebes, how's it going? Okay, bye kitty. Anyways, could we get them to work together on a rocket ship so that they can all fly off together and basically make a real-life version of BioShock? Hey everybody, it's Tristan and this is Quick Step!
Nope.
Kitty is not going to play with a straw today. So I got a wonderful request for a video subject that came up multiple times, but first came to me from Michael Kirshner, who is a friend of the channel, regular in the stream, and on the thank you list at the end of the Patreon video things. So let's talk about the Supreme Court. I'm sure it's on everyone's tongues these days. Jeez, it's like everyone wants to make noise today, it seems. So yeah, Justice Kennedy, the Supreme Court Justice, he has announced that at the end of July he's going to retire. Justice Kennedy, very recent votes aside, was typically a swing voter in the American Supreme Court, which led to at least a couple good decisions over his career, but upholding the Muslim ban and trying to clip the wings of unions and things like that has sort of soured that. Either way, most people know that once Kennedy is gone, there's going to be an attempt to like put, I don't know, Count Dracula into the Supreme Court with, oh, hey Romeo. Everyone's worried that with the Supreme Court position being filled by a Trump appointee, that you're going to have a hyper right-wing reactionary Supreme Court for decades to come. So even once Trump is out of office, the wonderful legacy of him will last on forever. 2 Supreme Court appointees in one term is actually quite impressive. And there's also, you know, a possibility that Ruth Bader Ginsburg will also retire because, you know, she's getting up there too. And yeah, all this debates about liberal and conservative Supreme Court justices really makes you think about the institution itself and how it's become basically a political institution. It's always supposed to have been a non-political interpreter of the Constitution, but that has literally never been true in the entire history of the United States. And so, really, the only way to think about the Supreme Court is as another branch of politics. It's a lifelong appointment that is done by the Senate and President, and it basically is a way to create a lasting legacy. And due to weird historical situations, there are a ton of right-wing justices, and it looks like more to come. So yeah, imagine a very bleak future in the next few years. You could see the overturning of Roe v. Wade. You could see the overturning of gay marriage in America. You could see a lot of rollbacks. They could roll back a lot of really important decisions that could essentially, you know, move America back to the dark ages of even just 5 years ago. So yeah, if I was American, I would be pretty terrified because without really much to do, there are a couple more years left where things like Roe v. Wade could be overturned, which would be a way to essentially turn America into Gilead. But there might be a solution. We might not be in a dystopian... Okay, we are in a dystopian hellscape, but there might be a way to at least alleviate the Supreme Court angle of it, and it comes back to 1937. You guys might have seen in Jacobin or a few other news articles that there's this new thing that's popping up called packing the Supreme Court. And it goes back to 1937. It goes back to the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, as you guys probably remember, the 1930s were not exactly the best of economic times for the United States, or the world in general for that matter. And after a sweeping victory in the 1936 election in which the Republicans got 8 electoral votes, basically the only states that the Republicans carried in that election were Maine and Vermont, which just shows how much the political compass has changed over the years. Anyways, there were a lot of Supreme Court decisions that were holding up the president's plan to implement parts of the New Deal, which was, you know, the way that the president was trying to get America out of the Great Depression, because they tried classical liberal options in the early 30s with the Republican presidents, and it led to the Depression getting even worse. You know, laissez-faire economics and the gold standard, basically a recipe for economic disaster. So FDR was trying to overthrow a lot of the things that were going on. He was trying to put in the New Deal in order to implement a more flexible economy and try to create employment so that the people who didn't have money could have money to spend in the economy so that they could then put money into the economy. There's a whole thing about velocity and moving money around. And because the Supreme Court was blocking so many of these, and so much of the Supreme Court were very ancient old guards from previous administrations, FDR decided to push this controversial plan in order to change the Supreme Court to make it, quote, more efficient, proposing adding new members to the Supreme Court to as many as 15. Instantly, his critics in both the Democratic and Republican Party were criticizing FDR for obviously trying to, quote, pack the court and change the dynamics of the court, filling it with a bunch of FDR appointees so that his policies could get pushed forward. Mostly because that is exactly what he was trying to do. Their main issue is that he was concentrating too much power in the executive branch of the government, which isn't untrue. He also tried other things to change the Supreme Court, including adding a full retirement benefit for Supreme Court judges after the age of 70 to sort of incentivize people to, like, you know, once you super old, maybe you should consider retiring. But either ways, that was FDR's plan. And I imagine FDR felt pretty confident given the massive, massive victory he made in 1936. On top of the retirement thing, he also made a requirement to have a, quote, assistant for any justice who was over the age of 70, who also had voting power, which meant that it was a way to counteract the old guard justices. Mostly it was to get the New Deal pushed forward. And most of Congress was against this plan. However, the plan never actually happened. Two Supreme Court justices decided to come over to the side of the new liberal Democratic Party, stating that the economic recovery that happened due to New Deal legislation sort of justified the New Deal programs that FDR was putting forward. And that allowed for the Senate to strike it down a little bit later. I will say that this was a deeply unpopular thing, and FDR spent a lot of political capital on it. But, you know, FDR had an overwhelming mandate from the people behind him, so take with that as you will. If you try to take the whole tribune of the plebs angle to the presidency, then it kind of makes sense. But if you go down that thought path, then Trump kind of makes sense as the tribune of the angry Fox News uncles everywhere. I mean, if you wanted a solution that I felt make a little bit more sense, you'd probably try to find some way to make the Supreme Court less partisan. Maybe not having the president appoint them, or not having the Senate vote them in, but instead, you know, treating it like it's any other court position. Oh wait, America votes on all judges, don't they? Maybe just treating it like it's a job. Another way you could improve the Supreme Court would be also if the US were to make a new constitution, because perhaps you would need an entire class of holy text interpreters if the Constitution wasn't extremely, extremely old, written in 18th century language, and, you know, very vague. Maybe like a new constitution that actually is written in modern language and all those things, you know, like most other countries have, but whatever. However, this is a thing that lies on the table. If the Democrats win in November and they take Congress in one form or another, either the Senate or the House, or maybe both, who knows. But either way, the way that it's going to end is going to result in somebody being a hypocrite. There's going to be two options. Either the Republicans are going to insist on appointing a new Supreme Court justice, which totally goes against the entire thing that Mitch McConnell said that was the point of his blocking the appointment of Merrick Garland a few years ago. Or Democrats will try to hold out until the midterm election in order to get a Supreme Court justice who doesn't drink blood. And in that case, they would also be hypocrites because of the way that they talked about the Merrick Garland appointee. Either way, I imagine both of those situations will be the case. Anyways, I do think that this is an important thing to talk about. The Supreme Court is a weirdly important part of the US political system, and with a opening on the Supreme Court coming at this point in the administration, this could result in one of the last stopgaps protecting democracy in America going away, which this whole administration has been a test of, right? To see how fascist America can go before the democracy just breaks and you end up with Trump followed by Trump the second, followed by Trump the third, etc., etc., etc. I should mention too, before I go, that on Wednesday nights, if you're a fan of D&D, I actually play in a D&D game as a dwarf monk. It's super fun. Link in the description if you want to start watching the show. It's every Wednesday night at 6:30 Eastern. Other than that, until next week, go to the Reddit if you want to choose the subject for next week's Quick Step. You guys, have an amazing week. Peace.